My name is Carlos Gonzalez Gutierrez. I am the Consul General of Mexico in Los Angeles. And I'm very grateful to my friend Rafael Fernandez de Castro, not only for inviting us to chat with you today, but more importantly, because he has been very consistent in using this forum as an opportunity to talk about the U.S.-Mexico relationship from the perspective of subnational governments. Those who have come in previous years will remember that this is a constant subject and an opportunity for us who are in California to talk about the interest of the state, the interest of Mexico, the interest of Baja California and the border states vis-a-vis central governments. I am very grateful as well to Maria Salinas, Antonio Villaraigosa, and Kenia Zamarripa for accepting our invitation. If I may, I am particularly grateful with Antonio Villaraigosa because he's a man in a campaign, as everybody knows. And for someone who's in a campaign, every minute is precious, es precioso, no le sobra. And so the fact that he accepted to drive here to San Diego and talk with us is highly appreciated. Para todos ustedes, muchísimas gracias. And so I'd like to try to leave some time for questions at the end of our session. So may I ask you to be brief? I want to talk mostly about trade, immigration, border infrastructure, and then whatever other topic you want. And perhaps last question about, a strategic question about U.S.-Mexico relations. So let me start with immigration. Immigration is often framed as a national issue, but obviously it impacts profoundly the relationship between California and Mexico. There is no other state in the US that has more people of Mexican origin. Approximately 12 million people, more than 12 million people in California are of Mexican origin. This is the state with the largest Mexican diaspora. It's a state with a huge undocumented population, or the biggest in the country. 1.6 million Mexicans are undocumented in the state, 60% of the total of 2.7 million undocumented immigrants who live in California. And so it's an issue that is crucial for the public debate here in California. So my question to you, and I would like to start with you, Maria, if it's okay. How has California responded to the immigration challenges during the Trump administration? What role do you see the state to play in the national debate? To what extent California can complement, oppose, or resist whatever comes from Washington, D.C.?
Great, thank you very much, and thank you to all of you for having me here, the panel here. You talk about the diaspora. I'm born and raised here. Mis papás son de Jalisco, and as a very young child, our relatives that lived here in San Diego and in Tijuana, Ensenada, traveled this corridor here. So I love the questions, the way you framed them, because I think of myself in many instances as living the immigrant experience because of my parents. But when I think about California, and I think about how California has really been an innovator in embracing our immigrant community, whether it's been through policies in education, in healthcare, or in any other aspect in the workforce that really enables a community to be part of its society. And so when we find ourselves today in a situation when there's such a tax on the immigrant population, I'm very proud that in California we can stand for the immigrant communities because they're members of our society. I sit in a number of meetings and convenings, both on the government level as well as through philanthropy. I don't think anybody wants to see us roll back the policies that we have here in California. If anything, I've been part of a number of conversations about how do we continue to protect, continue to make sure that that fear that is being experienced by our immigrant communities, that we lessen that we provide them with information on rights and identify for them trusted partners. We were on a conversation not too long ago talking about identifying trusted partners for members in our community that might be experiencing that fear. I think California is very unique in that way in terms of how it's innovated and how it's thought about its immigrant population to embrace it, and that it should be viewed as a model for other states in the country.
Antonio, ¿cómo la ves?
Primero quiero dar las gracias por la invitación a estar con ustedes. Yo no soy sí soy hijo de inmigrante del lado de mi papá, pero no lo conocí, no sé, joven de 5 años. Yo hablé solamente el inglés en la casa y aprendí durante los años. So I just want to say, I didn't have an immigrant experience, but I was involved in the Chicano movement. So a lot of what, and then later the civil rights movement, and as you know, Consul, I was Speaker of the Assembly. I was part of the move after Proposition 187. I had just gotten elected that year. Proposition 187, if you remember, was the initiative to deny health care and an education to the undocumented. I was one of the architects. There was a few of us, but I certainly was one of them. I was majority whip and majority leader and then speaker in the 90s that turned this state blue. So the policies that Maria is talking about were policies that came to fruition because we became a blue state, and everybody knew that we became a blue state because we registered more than 1 million Latinos in California. So our policies are very different from Texas. My criticism of Mexico is they do so much business with Texas, a state that, you know, if they had their way, I hear stories all the time of rich Mexicans going to Texas and getting treated like they were poor. That doesn't happen in quite the same way as it does in California. And that's been true for a long time, because my grandfather, who was from León, Guanajuato, and came here 120 years ago, first went to Texas and saw that, you know, Mexicans were, you know, lynched. The Texas Rangers were hunting for Mexicans back then, and then moved to California. So what I would say is the policies and, you know, that California has adopted over the years have gotten stronger and stronger with respect to protecting immigrants. As an example, we provide Medi-Cal to the undocumented. There are many sanctuary cities in California, and California is a sanctuary state. Now, some of that is fluff because we can't stop, you know, the INS from deporting people. So it's not really sanctuary, but we don't cooperate with them. In LA, we actually have been doing that since the 80s, the late 80s. And so, you know, there's no question that in a broad panoply of issues, California is leading the way with respect to the treatment of of the undocumented. And as we all know, in California, 90% of the undocumented are Latino. There are also high numbers of Asians and others, but good 90% are Latino, and the vast majority of them are from Mexico. With respect to those policies, what I could tell you is they're under assault as we speak. Trump and his minions are doing everything. Well, they are. I mean, the speaker before said there's only a few of them. They're not all fully staffed up, very right wing. Mexico doesn't have a right like that. I mean, this is as right wing as, virtually any country in the world. When you think they don't believe in climate change, they don't believe in evolution, they don't believe in vaccines. These are people that are falling off the flat earth they believe in. But there's no question much of the public policy that we've developed over the years with respect to immigrants is under assault. And, they may prevail because the courts are very, are probably the most conservative court we've ever had, at least since the mid-19th century, with, Dred Scott and the like. So, we have challenges, and they're challenges that, will affect ultimately the U.S.-Mexico relationship. Now, because there's so many, when people ask me, about the mass deportation of the undocumented, one of the people that asked me that on TV said something to the effect, that people are for it. They're actually not for it. Americans are not for the mass deportation. They are for, securing the border without question, but they're not for the mass deportation. So what I say is they're for it until they're not. When you start, in California particularly, but Texas and other states as well, but particularly California, when you look at agriculture, construction, the service industry, hospitality, we've seen the movie A Day Without a Mexican. The fact is, when they start rating them on a level that he's talking about, you will see a pushback that you have never seen. It will be much like that movie, A Day Without a Mexican. So, under assault and under threat without question, but it remains to be seen to what extent that will be true.
Let me ask you to add some spice to the conversation. You're running for governor. You're going to be asked about this many times. I don't want to be the undiplomatic diplomat, so I won't name names. But there are other politicians from your own party that have very powerful positions that are suggesting that Democrats in California should moderate themselves, should move to the center. Some people are saying Democrats, it's extremely expensive to offer health care to everybody, even if they are undocumented. So not necessarily in terms of your campaign, if you want to share something, welcome, but how do you see those challenges for your party, specifically in terms of the pressures people like you are receiving about moderating, moving the pendulum the other way after 20 years?
Well, I'm actually one of them that is arguing that we need to move more to the middle. I come out of the civil rights movement, the Chicano movement. I was a labor leader for 15 years. My politics are very progressive. At the same time, as an example, I'm challenging, the fact that, I used to say I grew up in a tough neighborhood and I used to fight all the time. And when you fight, you lead with your left or your right, not with your chin. And I think Democrats are leading with their chin on a broad panoply of issues. But on immigration, and and somewhat even on immigration. I mean, when they started saying no more INS, no more migra, come on. It's like chavalos. What are they talking about? Every country has a migra. Mexico has it. Every country in the world has one. Every country secures their borders. So arguing things like that is counterproductive. Now, what do I say? I say every country has a right to secure its borders. Every country has a right to determine how many people come into their country, but we should do so humanely. We shouldn't divide families. We should have a pathway to citizenship for the 11 million people that are living here and working here. And I don't believe, and I said this to Bush, I wrote this to Bush, I wrote this to Obama, who actually was the deporter in chief. I've said this to Hillary. We should go after serious felons as a priority, going after people that are working in the fields and factories and going to schools and courthouses and hospitals is insane and inhumane in my opinion. So I believe that I am driving down that common sense lane, but and by the way, the former HHS secretary, who's also in the race, said the other day, with respect to Medi-Cal for the undocumented, if we don't have the money, we don't have the money. I said the opposite. I said, we already pay for the undocumented. Well, in California. But across the country, we pay for the undocumented. It's called emergency health care, and over the long term, you spend more on emergency health care when these people don't have health care than you do if you provided them health care. So I say to them, the common sense thing to do is to provide that health care. And then I say, we just got out of a pandemic where, COVID doesn't say you're undocumented, I'm not going to get you, you are documented. COVID is COVID. So I've argued that we should continue to provide that care, but I do so from an argument that's hard to, it's not just because they're undocumented. I do it because it's good public health and because it's more cost effective and because it's the main thing to do. So with respect to all of that, what I would say is that we're living in times that we've never lived before in this country. I've lived here my whole life, and as you could probably tell, I've been around a few decades now. And what I would say is we're going to get through this, but there's no question that the relationship with Mexico's already been affected. The relationship with the diaspora of Mexicanos that live in California and across the country going to be impacted, but particularly in the red states, which is why if I was Mexico, I'm not, those states that demonize Mexicans, they love talking about how they have all these offices in the United States to protect them. Those offices that demonize Mexicans the way Texas does, the way it's Alabama and Florida and all those states, there ought to be repercussions for that. They ought to redirect their trade to a state that doesn't do it.
Muchas gracias.
Just saying.
Yeah, just saying. Kenia, let me ask you about border infrastructure. You are an expert on that. Border infrastructure is critical to California in terms not only of economic well-being, but also security. What are the biggest challenges? How do you see the relationship with the federal government? How is Otay 2 going?
I think actually to tie it up with our previous conversation on immigration is that we often talk about the border, and it's instantly a conversation about illegal immigration. And where I'm standing, I would like to also, elevate and propagate the understanding of an efficient border is one that facilitates legitimate trade and travel while also prioritizing national security. And we're often guided on this narrative that they're mutually exclusive when they're not. In border infrastructure and border efficiency is, of course, border infrastructure. Here in Cali Baja, we are desperate and very eager to see the new land port of entry, Wota Mesa East. A lot of us here in the room have been advocating for that and helped secure funds on both sides of the border. And of course, Mexico's already done. And we're waiting patiently and impatiently here in the US. And then so efficient border is infrastructure, but it's also technology. And we'll see that to an extent at that new port of entry. We've seen it sometimes too on the former CBP1 app and facilitating immigration and relying a little bit more on technology. Of course, that's now the CBP home, and it's a conversation about self-deportation, so a step behind. And then it's also a question about staffing, and that is a big challenge that I wanted to get into, and that is, in order for us to maximize both the investment in technology and the investment in infrastructure, we need to have fully staffed ports of entry. And that is, an estimate between 1,200 to, I've heard, 6,000 CBP officers at sea, land, and airports. That's what you see, the long lines, despite you having TSA, or if you're at Sentry, it's still an hour or an hour and a half during rush hour. And we continue to have that staffing issue. And then, of course, when we're talking, again, border efficiency or anything border, the federal government makes it a conversation about illegal immigration. So we hear about staffing Border Patrol, we hear about staffing ICE, and we rarely see legislation that succeeds at staffing CBP. So that is something that we can continue to work together. Of course, here at the southern border, we understand the need. But I would say that there's an opportunity there for everyone else in the state that is not Southern California to understand how crucial the border is as an economic engine for the state and for the rest of the country. If not because of tourism reasons, it's just understanding trade. And understanding that trade, of course, and I know we'll dive into that in a little bit, is huge for a national economy, and that our border states are not just looking after each other, but our contribution to the rest of the rest of the economy nationwide, and of course as an axe. But yeah, again, it's border infrastructure and understanding and elevating the notion of facilitating trade and travel, and that it's not mutually exclusive with prioritizing national security.
That's a good bridge towards trade and talking about tariffs and what have been the consequences of these trade frictions between the U.S. and Mexico. In Los Angeles, I have talked with people who lost $2 million, $2.5 million in those 3 or 4 days que estremecieron al mundo, in which tariffs were extremely high for Mexico. And I hear from my friends, custom brokers, that here in San Isidro, cargo for several weeks, you tell me the numbers, was reduced for almost 30%. What do you think? What's the impact, long-term impact and medium-term impact that these difficult days have had?
Well, I mean, just to understand something for California. Our number one exporter, a country that we export to, is Mexico. Mexico, Canada, Mexico and China are our 2 biggest trading partners. And then Canada. Nobody's hurt by tariffs. No state is hurt more than California. No state. Half of the Mexicans that go visit the United States, half of them come to California. Mexico is our biggest visitor, country. China was for a long time a very big one, not bigger than Mexico, but very big. That's gone down a lot. You said we actually lost about between 33 and 36% of the cargo just at just at LA Long Beach.
Oh, yeah, well, that's another.
Yeah, just at LA Long Beach because of these tariffs. So, and your point is so well taken. Every time, by the way, I did this forum 25 years ago just to show you how old I am. After I lost the first mayor's race, and I came here and did this forum, and I said then, one day, today's not the day, but one day, Mexicans in the United States or Americans of Mexican descent are going to play a similar role, maybe not as influential, but a similar role on U.S.-Mexico relations that Jews do with Israel. Now, when I said that 25 years ago, people looked at me like I was crazy. But you're already seeing that in California. And I think at some point you'll see it in Texas, and you'll see it in particularly the border states. San Diego, historically a very conservative city, always understood that they have a relationship with Mexico, and so they actually have somebody that's, focused just on that. So you're going to see the impact of U.S. Mexicanos or Mexican Americans on that relationship. I think you'll also see with Cubans in Cuba at some point, but certainly with Mexicans. But today's not the day. We don't have the economic power that comes with the growing political power. And unfortunately, what happens, in the United States, no group votes less than Latinos, and of Latinos, Mexicans vote among the least. They just don't vote. As an example, in the last governor's race, they voted 3-1 for me, and they came out at 17%. Right now, when I walked in, the housekeeper recognized me and gave me a big hug, and Villaraigosa, and I hope she's going to vote, but, I'm not sure she is. And that's our problem. That's our problem. But one day we will have that impact, and you're already seeing it in California. So, yes, your point is so well taken. The fact is, the relationship with the economic and trade relationship is so big. And yet, when I was speaker and when I was mayor, the newspapers wrote, "Why is he going to Mexico? He must be going because he's Mexican." I'm going to China too, I'm going to Korea. But whenever I went to Mexico, they made a big deal about it. Now, probably less so, but 25 years ago, let me tell you, when I went to Mexico promoting trade and tourism, and when I went as mayor, it was a big thing. The newspapers did not like it. And it is what it is. So that role that she mentioned is much more dominant than the issue of immigration. And even immigration, as negative as, Latinos and Mexicans are contributing mightily to the U.S. economy, but you never hear that. All you hear is the other.
I was going to just jump into what you were saying there, because there's the economic power. We recognize that there is economic power, and that's why, we're big advocates when we talk to the global trade and the whole bit related to that. But Antonio, you talk about the political power that is also equally important. But when I think about the economic power, I think that in this time, there's an opportunity to be more intentional about our relationship at the California level, with trade missions, with sister city relationships, anything that is different that keeps us focused on the statewide versus the federal level. We should be taking advantage of that opportunity to have these very intentional relationships, because this time will pass. And how we come out of it, we don't know. But I do believe that it's an opportunity to, like these kind of forums, to just have some results, some strategic partnerships and goals that come out of that.
Let me ask you one last question, and then we open it up for the general public, the audience. I think that most of us in the room, those of us who are familiar with the California-Mexico relationship, most of us, I think we are convinced that California is our best friend in the world. Yes, it's a subnational government, but it's the fourth economy in the world. It helps immigrants integrate. It's so important for us in terms of technology and trade. And it opens us doors for the rest of the country. It's the vanguard in so many aspects. And so those of us who are, for example, as Reina was saying, doing consular diplomacy in this country, we always talk about the special relationship that Mexico has with California, the special relationship that we need to develop with Mexican-American leaders and Latino speakers, or like you were, and members in Sacramento. But I always wonder whether decision makers in California, of both parties, realize that potential, whether they are aware about the need of having a special relationship with Mexico, or is California so big and so global that Mexico is not as important as we think or we want to think that it is for you? Do we have a special relationship with California? Have we moved in that direction in strategic terms of, or not really?
I believe we have a very special relationship, but we also need to think about what is the narrative, right? Do the average Californian understand the basics of that economic relationship that makes that so special? You know, Antonio, you talked about the visits that happen in Israel. Why don't we do something similar here? That is a natural and it's an easy. So to me, like, that's the way that Mexico can present itself with its best friend that maybe isn't seeing that entire value through, you know, the conversation that is happening here in the state. But to me, those are opportunities that can be achieved with partners like who you have on stage here.
I think something I would add is that it's a very important relationship. I think both state governments and local governments, and especially on the business sector, we acknowledge it, embrace it, and want to grow it. But to your point, I don't know that the general community out there or elected officials, even between LA and Sacramento, understand that relationship that much. There's also many attempts to strengthen that relationship. There's the Commission of the Californias, and conversations between state-to-state officials and how to push and empower through different initiatives together, whether that's energy or water conservation, et cetera. I think there's an opportunity, to your point, on maybe leveraging those existing channels and new ones to bring in the business sector. And I've said this multiple times, like the business sector, nonprofits, and local, and the community in general, we are the constant. I mean, we see local, state, and federal administrations come and go. And then in terms of the bilateral relationship, it's navigating local, state, federal, and then on both sides, and making sure that everything falls into place and everyone's on the same page and everyone's using the same numbers and the same priorities. And I know we do that at the chamber with, delegations to DC and Mexico City, but it's like a group of selected people that understand and that, act as unofficial, U.S.-Mexico ambassadors. And we can promote that sort of unofficial title to have more members of the community and more community leaders that are not necessarily elected officials to join those efforts and strengthen that relationship and also elevate outreach so that the community understands.
I think I agree with both comments. And I think that I said 25 years ago, and I've said it over a number of years, I think Mexico needs to be cultivating the young Latino policymakers and developing relationships the way Israel does. with Jews. I think that makes sense. I think they ought to be offering scholarships to some of them, particularly young up-and-coming people that understand that relationship. And it is amazing to me that if you look at California, Southern California, particularly San Diego, understand this relationship better than Northern California. The governors historically, have all been of European descent. And I've known all of them since the 70s, personally. I'd say none of them really understood it. And I do. I spent a lot of time in Mexico until recently, and I do because I understand this relationship. I've known every Mexican president since Salinas, and had a relationship with everyone since Cedillo. And I'll tell you something. I expect that California, we can't have subnet. You know that diplomacy, trade gets, diplomacy is developed federally, not state. But, trade, tourism, commerce, states engage in that. And I fully expect as more and more as the Latino population grows and as we get people at that level, you're going to see this relationship flower because it's just natural. Our economies are intertwined, and as I mentioned, not just trade, but tourism as well. The diaspora is larger here than any other state by a lot, by the way. Este es el epicentro de la mexicanada en los Estados Unidos. And so, from my vantage point, I only see stronger relationships. But I think your point was right, Maria. They have to be intentional. They have to be intentional. And, give UC San Diego and this forum, they've been doing this for years. They understand this relationship. I don't think Berkeley understands it the same way. I don't think most of California understands it the way San Diego and LA do but even, like when I look at the mayors before me and after me, they haven't been as focused on Mexico as I was. They just haven't. And yet our trade with Mexico, just LA alone, is gigantic.
Muy bien. Well, let's open the floor for questions. La senadora Karina, si se pueden presentar brevemente y
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Karina Ruiz. I am a Mexican senator, the first immigrant that represents people of Mexican origin in the Senate in Mexico. Federal level, yes. I live in Phoenix, Arizona for the past 25 years. I am a DACA recipient. I migrated with my parents in 1999. And I've lived in Arizona through SB 1070. When I hear former Mayor Villaraigosa talk about the Sensenbrenner and all that history, it touched a lot, especially being a dreamer when they took away our education. Well, they didn't take it away exactly, but they tripled our tuition. And so that pushed us to come out of the shadows and say undocumented and unafraid, even though we were very scared. Obviously, that was not the Trump era. I don't know that in these times people would turn that fear into courage. I do believe that that's what needs to happen. And I do believe that the relationship between Mexico and the U.S., with the young people especially, it's so important right now. My children and my children, my grandkids, are the ones who are going to remember these policies of immigration. And in time, now I have one son that can vote. And in 3 years, I'm going to have another one. And if in 5 years, another one. So it's just a matter of time. And this new generation is having the conscience about participating civically. Even in the diaspora in the US, we saw the consulates having so many people wanting to participate in the vote in this past election in Mexico. We are creating and generating this effort to participate in the politics of both countries. That binational sentiment of a lot of new generations of children of immigrants are the ones who are going to change the dynamic. But I think Trump is that thing that has put an urgency into this issue. And I also want to mention that it's not just immigration. We need to speak in also LGBTQ rights, women's rights. Immigrants are different, we have different identities. And I think that's so important that we talk about in that sense, because otherwise we get caught up in just a conversation about immigration, the criminality, and the trade. And we lost the opportunity of coming together against the biggest enemy that we have right now. And I want to say that thanks to the undocumented, in part, Arizona is now a swing state. And we have changed, not like California yet, but it was because people that couldn't vote like myself made efforts to turn out our children and our family members and friends that could, to have that conscience that their participation matters beyond themselves, right? So thank you everyone. And
Gracias, senadora. Muchísimas gracias, la senadora Karina Ruiz. Let's take a couple of questions and then we ask the panel. Don José Galicot, aquí levantó la mano. Acá enfrente, por favor.
Qué rápido llegó, ¿verdad? Queridos amigos, es un honor estar en este evento y hay dos grupos de gente que yo quisiera rendir homenaje, aprovechando esta oportunidad. Primero, a la gente que trabaja en los consulados mexicanos. Yo creo que son héroes. Todos los mexicanos que nos acercamos a pedir ayuda, cada vez que hablamos con ellos, cada vez que queremos cooperación, sentimos el calor de la patria de México y sentimos el esfuerzo, un esfuerzo increíble al grado de sacrificio de los consulados con condiciones a veces económicas difíciles, pero con una voluntad inquebrantable. El otro grupo al que yo quisiera rendir homenaje es a los mexicanos americanos, a nuestra diáspora. Yo siento que México no cumple con la responsabilidad de cuidar a la diáspora. Si yo tengo un cliente que me manda $800 millones al año, debo de invertirle por lo menos $20 millones para reencontrarme con ellos, para darles, para atraerlos. Sin embargo, tenemos una diáspora heroica, trabajadora, manda dinero al país, se sienten mexicanos, vayan a los juegos de fútbol y van a ver. Y finalmente son dos grupos que somos nosotros los que estamos aquí, que debemos reconocer. Y finalmente les pido de veras de corazón un fuertísimo aplauso para la gente del consulado, de los consulados.
Muchas gracias. Gracias, don José. ¿Alguna otra? Por favor, hablando de el excónsul de México en Los Ángeles, Juan Marcos Gutierrez.
Hola. Muy buenas tardes a todos. Antonio, it's always very good to see you again. By the way, you met my daughters. You know, in my family, I'm the only one non-binational. The rest, they are. You met my daughters when they were little. Nowadays, the two of them live in LA and they're voters. So there you go. I wanted just to emphasize and asking the panel what the aims should be in this subnational diplomacy task. We all know there is one, state, local level. I believe it's very important to just leave it to the governmental officials. So it is very important, the players, the cultural side, the social side, the economics, of course. But other than that, what is the agenda? And here's just a small suggestion, which is big at the same time because it comes from a very important document. As you know, Daron Acemoglu and James Robinson, Nobel Prize Awards last year, wrote this study called Why Nations Fail. And one of their studies within that book is the case of Nogales, Sonora, and Nogales, Arizona. And it's very curious. It seems even so logical, so basic, the findings, but why it is so hard to build an agenda out of it. So my suggestion to the panel and to whoever plays a role in subnational policy will be aiming towards that agenda of reshaping institutions. It's not possible that in the same land, in the same area, which have such inequalities, just because in the Mexican side, we're not capable of shaping and reshaping institutions in order to equalize our relations with the other side of the border. And what I want to say is that maybe one of the main issues of this agenda should be for the whole fabric playing a role in subnational diplomacy to demand to address water management, public safety, budgeting, correct tax collections. You were saying earlier about transparency. It is a shame the levels of corruption you were playing. So the more the whole fabric in this relation at the subnational level pushes toward equalizing our institution shape, I believe we're going to do better. Otherwise, again, I was one, I have been in government, but again, this thing is by far very important just to leave it to governmental officials.
Muchas gracias. Gracias, Juan Marcos. Final thoughts in less than 4 minutes.
Time is for 1 minute. So I wanted to address the importance of civic engagement and understanding that if not voting, there's also other opportunities for people out there in the community, like joining local and state boards and commissions, and certainly taking opportunities such as like trade delegations or advocacy delegations to whether Sacramento or DC, or in our case, also Mexico City, so that can raise our voice as a community to decision makers. Because otherwise, if we're just talking amongst each other in the room, nothing gets done. In terms of a binational agenda, I think the list is huge. Obviously, as part of this, like boards and commissions or delegations, we want to make sure that academic, industry leaders, nonprofits are all represented. So it's just an open invitation to take action to everyone. I mean, in terms of binational priorities, I have a list. It's border efficiency, it's immigration reform, it's enhancing North America trade competitiveness together, it's sustainable access to energy and water. Those are things that I think are all constant at the local, state, and federal levels. And my minute is done.
¿Quieres seguir tú, Antonio?
I think your point's well taken, Consul. There's much that state could do. There's much cities can do and counties can do. But there's also much that Chamber of Commerce can do. I know you do a trip, I think, yearly. Could probably even do more than, one city. I mean, Mexico City, Guadalajara, Monterrey. I think it needs to be, as I said, intentional, and it should be vertical and horizontal. And so, I made the time because I know how important this relationship is to both countries, not just to Mexico, to the United States. We don't understand that, most of our policymakers, but it's an important one, and it's an important one because of the point that you made, Xenia. The trade, the commerce, the fact, the cultural exchanges, all of those things make this a very special relationship, and one that both countries need to proceed with intentionality. Mexico's going to have to take the lead because the United States hasn't yet really understood the opportunities that come. I've always believed that with USMTA, or what's it called, the UC, what used to be NAFTA. I've always believed, and that day still could come, especially with the growing middle class in Mexico. I think these borders are going to be much more porous, less focused on the trade. When you look at this, Canada, the United States, and Mexico, you got a trade area as formidable as any in the world. We're just not taking advantage of it, and I think over time we will. But like I said, with respect to the issue of the impact Latinos are going to have on U.S.-Mexican relations, today's not the day, but it will be one day.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for that. I think what I would add to this is, the intentionality that we need to work with. When I look at the U.S.-Mexico Forum at UC San Diego, the opportunity to create and to innovate of what that needs to look like. I think you said something very powerful when you're talking about we will always be here, the business community, the community-based organizations, and let's use that to fuel change that can be something that we can really create, something that's strategic in terms of that relationship. And if I could just say one more thing, because the senator's comments I thought were so powerful. What I've often thought, what is that moment right now that we're under attack? You talked about 187 and what it did. My parents became citizens because of 187. But I think it's our children that are going to make those changes in the future. I have young boys myself, and I look at what they're experiencing and seeing, and they embrace their Mexicaness that they have. So I think there's so much power in this room, and I look forward to being part of leading change.
Muchísimas gracias, María. If I may take a very final last word, I want to say I'm very optimistic about the future, and particularly about the role that Latinos and Mexican Americans are going to have in the relationship between the U.S. and Mexico. They are called to be a bridge of understanding. I know that many of us thought that this would come earlier, but I am convinced, just like Mayor Villaraigosa said, the time is ripe, and we will soon see how powerful our friends are at the national level advocating for a stronger relationship with Mexico. Muchísimas gracias por quedarse todo el día y nos estamos viendo.